Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Sky Careers podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hodgson, Sky Careers co-founder, and we've got a very special edition of the podcast today because, and very belatedly, I've finally managed to convince my partner in crime and the other co-founder of Sky Careers, Sue-Ann Munckton, to join us. Sue-Ann, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Mark.
It seems a bit weird, hey, you
It
and me
does.
podding together. So what we're gonna do, dear listener, because Sue-Ann has got an amazing story, and we're gonna break it into a couple of parts. So this will be one of two podcasts. So we're gonna have a chat today, get you to know Sue-Ann and her early career, how she fell in love with aviation, and as you'll hear, her amazing story into aviation, and then we'll set up a separate podcast where we'll talk about larger aviation themes, aviation education, increasing the participation of women in aviation, all that stuff. We'll do that in a separate podcast. So, Sue-Ann, today we're going back to basics, and as you know well, I always start with the same question: where did you go to school? And what were your favourite subjects before the world of aviation knocked on your door?
I went to school in WA in a place, Mount Helena. I went to Eastern Hills Senior High School. And before that, I went to the primary school across the road. We literally walked across the driveway and went to high school with pretty much all the kids that I went to school with. So I was a school nerd. I was a sit at the front seat, close to the teacher, did all my homework, assignments and things. I ended up doing humanities subjects. So I didn't touch physics. I did love maths, but I did do a maths subjects, but I did human biology, economics, history. I played the flute in the school band, and I did music for year 12. So nothing really that pointed to a career in aviation traditionally, none of those subjects.
Okay. So where was aviation in your world? Was it in your world at all as a young girl?
Totally. My baby book actually says my first outing was to the airport to pick my dad up because he was an airline pilot.
Oh, okay.
So yes, my dad flew. Well, he flew lots of things, but his favourite was the DC-3. He flew that around WA and worked for MMA, McRobinson Miller Airlines, which then became Airlines of WA, Ansett WA, all sorts of things. And he ended up overseas working for Air France and Singapore Airlines, doing a lot of different things. So his background was airline, so we were very much an airline family, dad being away odds and sod times and not being around birthdays, Christmas, but then he could pick you up from school when he was home. So that was quite a lovely life, but it was our life. That's just what we knew. And we lived in Derby for a period of time when my dad had to do his country time, and flew twin otters to all the stations, delivering all the mail and the food and things like that. And my mum was a School of the Air teacher, so I had a great time going to kindy in Derby while all that was happening. It was just what you did. Dad was a pilot, mum was a teacher.
Love it. Was it kind of an obvious and assumed thing for you to get involved with? Were you passionate, or was it kind of how did you go from being a daughter of an airline pilot and an aviation family to actually making your first inroads into aviation yourself?
I didn't ever, as a kid, think of myself being an airline pilot. I was going to be an astronaut.
Sure. And anyone knows Sue-Ann, cool. Pilot.
I used to lay out the back on the grass. We lived way up in the hills, so it was quite good. We didn't have a lot of background lights. And I just watched the satellites coming over and just imagine what it would be like to look down on Earth and to be in an aircraft that can leave the Earth and return. And the space shuttle wasn't a thing then, but that was just amazing to me that we could perhaps do this one day. And then it kind of was a dream, and then reality kicked in, and I thought, well, one day when I've had a real job and I've got a house in the suburbs and the picket fence and two kids in a station wagon, I might go and get my pilot's license one day. And then later in high school, I decided no, that's I was going to space, or I was going to I was going to fly jets, I was going to do all these amazing things, and then went to a career day and went to the ADF, all bright-eyed, and how do I get into this? And I couldn't. I was a little bit, being female, I was a bit too early in the scheme of things. I could do the training here at Pierce, that was fine, but couldn't fly jets. So women couldn't fly jets in those days. My
For the
choices
that's
were,
for the military, for the
yes,
Royal
for the
Australian Air Force.
Defence
Yeah,
Force. So that was kind of my route into being an astronaut. You had to go into the Defence Force, and then I'd
yeah,
have to get to
yeah,
the
yeah.
States. And I kind of knew the progress part of it. I mean, this is a 16, 17-year-old me. And my choices, if I had joined the Air Force, would have been to fly cargo type, so the larger aircraft,
Yeah, yeah.
or fly politicians around as VIPs. And my 16-year-old, 17-year-old self went bah humbug to that. If I can't fly jets, I'm not going to do it, because it's not what I want to do. And I applied for law at uni instead.
Oh, okay. Didn't see that coming. All right.
So I did the traditional TE in those days with all those, economics and history and music subjects, and was waiting for my TE result to see if I could get into UWA, which was the pathway I wanted. And a friend of my dad was an air traffic controller and an instructor, and he and my dad bumped into each other when I was standing there, and Dick Wellborn was his name, and he said, come down to the club on a Sunday, I'll take you for a fly. And I did, and I can still remember that flight in a little 152 around Pierce Air Base, because they used the airbase at the weekend. And I landed, and my dad just looked at me and he went, oh, you want to fly? And I went, I want to fly. I don't. So he said, well, you can tell your mum. Which she was very supportive, but it kind of wasn't a discussion that we had had about flying. And funnily enough,
Because she's thinking law school, right?
she's thinking law school,
Yeah.
first person in the family to go to uni. I mean, my mum went to teachers college and my dad did flying, but, it was the first uni student. And I went, nah, defer all that. I'm going to go fly aeroplanes. And I
And
started the week after.
and sorry, I'll just make this point for those who for listeners. It is a common misconception that to be a pilot, you need to have a degree. It's
No,
just
not at all.
true. As Sue-Ann's telling you, my brother is a captain with Virgin Atlantic. He's been on the Sky Careers podcast. Flies, hundreds of people for 20 years now. Has not been to university. You don't need a
No.
degree
And when
to be a
I did
pilot.
it, which is the late 80s, early 90s, um, you had to self-fund it. You had to self-study. There were some flying schools that taught the theory. It wasn't until a couple of years later that TAFE even started doing the classes. And I actually started working at TAFE as a part-time lecturer at the time. But there wasn't options. There was one way to do it. You paid for it, you studied. I did some commercial classes. There was a lovely gentleman who ran commercial theory courses, and I did those. And you just, handed over your money after every flight, and it was a lot cheaper then, but still an
Yeah,
expensive thing to do.
yeah.
Certainly more expensive than it would have been for me to do law. And funnily enough, Dick Wellborn, who was the instructor that I flew with for the first time, when I became a chief flying instructor and chief pilot, he was the chief flying instructor and chief pilot at a different school at Jandakot.
Beautiful,
So
beautiful.
that's, yeah.
So, but take us back. So, you decided you want to be a pilot,
Mhm.
and how long did it take you to do the training to your your private pilot's license, your commercial pilot's license, and I guess the pathway into you actually having your first job, because there's several stages there, aren't they? And
Yes.
they're all important.
Yeah, so when I was doing the training, all the licenses were separate and you had to logically work your way through. So I got what was called a restricted pilot license, and that probably took me nearly a year, and that meant that I could take passengers into the training area. And that's had all sorts of different names and changes over the time, but the hours and the qualifications still stayed the same. So I did that pretty much in 1988 and then spent 89 getting my private license. So then I could take family and friends, as long as I really didn't get paid for it, anywhere in Australia. And I did some amazing trips to Darwin, Alice Springs, flew over Ayers Rock, the Bungle Bungles, just down the Prince Regent River into just magnificent. I mean, we're so lucky in this country to have these places to fly over. So I did that to get all my hours up. So that culminated in a lot of theory exam study, and I must admit I wasn't great at the study, and I never was at school. I was really good with assignments, but really bad with exams. So when I
Wow,
did,
that surprised me, Sue Ann
I
Munckton. Now you tell me. We've been in business for 2 years. Now you
no,
tell me.
give me an assignment and I will blitz it. And I can still remember my history teacher handing me back my mock exam in year 12, and I'd failed my mock exam. And he put it on my desk and he said, Miss Roberts, I could not be more disappointed.
The D word. He got out the
Yes.
D word.
And
Oh.
he was my best friend's dad too.
Oh. Oh.
He completely answered questions that we hadn't covered in our syllabus, and I didn't notice. That's actually how bad I was at exams. Anyway, so I did not pass my commercial theory exams, all of them, the first time. Flight rules nailed. You know me,
Yeah.
a rule for
Yeah.
head for
Another
rules.
roll. Yeah.
But I really did struggle, and it wasn't uncommon for people to fail. There were 6 individual exams, and then you had what was called a finals exam. And in those days, you used to get an envelope posted to you with your results. So you would not only have to go and sit them physically in the office in the city, you would then have to wait for the mailman. And the finals was a yellow envelope. So that was, you had to wait for that
Wow.
yellow envelope and open it, and it would give you a pass or a fail on it. And I can remember the day I passed, because I think it was about my 4th attempt, and I had a little Datsun 180B, and my dad and granddad had gone into the bush to chop wood and bring some wood home, and I decided to bush bash in my little Datsun 180B. I was so excited. I went down all these tracks looking for my dad to show him
Waving.
this piece. And I was actually waving this yellow piece of paper out the window of my car. I was so, because it meant I could then commence my commercial training. And
Right.
yeah,
And I'll loop back to the fact you didn't just whiz through the training and find that easy, because I suspect that's going to be an important part of your story. So you've got your yellow envelope with you've passed. What happens next? How do you actually move into a
so
paid
then
aviation role?
you had to get flying hours up in command, so solo in the airplane or with friends, like not under instruction. And then you had to do your commercial training. So you had to go and do navigation exercises, drills, emergency procedures, simulated commercial flights like charter flights or photography runs. Like that was a very big thing here at the time. We'd simulate a flight that you had to go and take a photo of the jetty at Perth City and then this shopping centre, and you had to be able to
Okay.
negotiate that with air traffic control, slow the aircraft down and position it so that your instructor, if they were taking a photo, so you kind of had to maneuver. It was all, yeah, it was simulating those first job scenarios.
Yeah, lovely. That's very smart. I like
Yeah.
that. That's good. Yeah.
So
And so you at
I
some
went
point
and did
you
my
qualified and you got a job. How did that happen? When did it start from you giving people money to fly to people giving you money to fly?
So I got my commercial license, and then, like every other commercial pilot at the time, you begged and begged for, a 20-minute flight over the city or anything that was a paying flight. And the flying school that I did my commercial license at spoke to me and said, look, you know, you might not have passed your exams the first time, but your knowledge is amazing. You're just no good at exams. So they actually asked me to teach theory. And funnily enough, the first finals course that I taught, all 8 passed the first time. And I felt like, well, that's because I know this exam so well. I just couldn't pass it.
You'd road
But I
tested it a few
I
times.
knew how you should pass it. So
Yeah.
so I started teaching theory, teaching at night, doing private pilot theory and some commercial theory. Because I was there, I'd get a couple of joy flights, that type of thing. I looked at going up north, so I looked and almost got myself a job in Kununurra, which was pretty much the place to go in the 90s, because of the bungles, the number of tourist flights and that sort of thing that would
Right.
happen.
Okay.
Similarly, in Ayers Rock, that was a huge centre for people from Perth to go and get jobs.
I've just realised, Sue, and I forgot to say at the beginning, Sue Ann lives in
Oh,
Perth.
yes, I live in Perth. Everything is WA for me. Born, bred, and
Yeah.
stayed. With
Terrible hosting.
great bias towards the mighty state of WA. But anyway, that's a different story. And then I decided, due to just my parents moved overseas at that time, I had a younger sister here. I thought now's probably not the time to move away. Discovered that I loved teaching. I loved helping people and getting to know people and seeing them click. You know, being able to go, well, that explanation's not working for you. How can I explain it differently or draw it differently? Or, you know, you're not somebody that can read from a book, so let's go sit out in the aircraft and learn about aerodynamics by sitting under a wing and looking at it. And I didn't realize that I did until I did, kind of thing. So I did my flight instructor's rating and loved it. Loved it. Best thing in the world. So I got my instructor's rating, moved through the different grades of instructor. So that is a great way of getting hours up and staying in a big centre is doing. But when I became a senior instructor, I would always say to people, don't do it unless you want to teach, because it's very difficult and it's so important that we teach properly. That's just a massive passion of mine. And a lot of people did it just to get their hours up and weren't good teachers. So then we don't get good students, and people even leave because they're just not getting a great experience as a result. So I did that, and then ultimately became what was called in those days a chief flying instructor and chief pilot. They now call it a head of flying operations and a head of training and checking. There's been a name change. It's the same role. And then the flying school and the China company where I was holding that position came up for sale. And
So give me where how old are you now?
22, 23.
Oh, so you're very still very young.
Still very, I was one of the youngest, if not the youngest, chief pilot and chief flying instructor at the time, which was a little bit of consternation from a few people that said, no, you don't know what you're doing, you're not old enough, and you're a girl. That was a bit of an issue at the time.
We touched on that a lot on the podcast,
Yes.
as you know. Yeah.
So, but I got it and had a fabulous mentor, and that's something, as you know, I'm very passionate about. Everybody, no matter who you are and where you are in your leadership journey, mentoring is beyond valuable. It should just be in place for everybody. And she was very supportive, and my boss was very supportive, and my partner was very supportive, and I just went in and did my best and actually corrected Cass's theory exam because they had some questions wrong. So
Of course you did. So you bought a flying school.
I did. I had a share in a flying school, and then I took over the flying school, and I have worked for myself since I was 23.
Yeah, well, we both know, you're like me, you're unemployable, you know.
Totally.
And
I would be
I can't imagine us working very well. But so just paint a picture for us. So this is a young Sven Munckton. You're flying out of Jandakot, would it be?
Yes, Jandakot.
Yeah, yeah. What is a flight? What is your flying school? Is that one plane, 20 planes? What?
No,
How does
we
it?
had a couple to start with, so we only had
Yeah.
two or three to start with, and we ultimately built that up until we had eight different aircraft. We actually also put online an aircraft called the Eagle, and that was actually designed and manufactured here in WA down at Henderson in the shipyards. It was built down in the shipyards. So we were the first school in Australia to use the Eagle aircraft as a training aircraft. Um, so we had facilities, we did, all the things that flying schools do. You taught the theory, you taught the students. We had students who were doing it for fun. We had students that were doing it full time for a commercial license. Those that were doing it for fun and then changed their mind. My area that I loved mostly was the instructor rating training. So getting young, or not necessarily young, but young in hours. Like they didn't have a lot of flight hours. They had commercials and they wanted to be instructors. So I did the instructor rating training. And then at this time as a chief flying instructor, you were also a testing officer. So I was that person that did the flight tests. So I loved that. I loved, seeing people's bucket list items, people that, like one gentleman said to me, I've wanted to learn to fly longer than you've been alive. And I always remember, like the number of times I cried and the person would cry and we'd be sitting in the aircraft and say, when we both stop crying, we'll go back inside and tell everybody that you've passed. But it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of
Yeah,
money and it's a lot of
yeah.
commitment, and a lot of people were doing it on weekends, so it was time away from their family, and obviously the money being spent was money that wasn't being used for other things. It could have been, so many people would say, I've wanted to do this since I can't remember when. And they're now in their 50s, their 60s, even in their 70s, finally doing this thing that they have dreamt of their whole lives. And I was there when it all kind of fell into place and they could finally hold the license. So it was very emotional for a lot of people, and them. And that's what I loved about being at the flying school. You actually got to know these people and you got to get involved in their lives, just because you just saw them so often, and that's anybody from, my youngest student was 10 and my oldest was, in their 80s when they got their license. So that's a huge gamut of people, and it taught me a lot, because now looking back at it and I look at 23-year-olds and I go, oh my goodness, you shouldn't have a driver's license. And do you know what I mean? Like, it's just
Yeah.
perspective when you look at that. And I look back and I was very confident, and I do believe I knew what I was doing as an instructor, and that was obviously what my thing was. Like, I was passionate about it, and it was everything to me. Have I learned a lot about being, and I know this is a different conversation, but leading people, running businesses? Oh, absolutely. Like, lots of things learned. But I had a 23-year-old head on my shoulders, not a mid-50s one.
So a couple of things that I guess so. A couple of questions. So how long did you run the flying school for?
Nearly 15 years, 12,
So
12,
nearly
17 years.
nearly 15 years, and as they will, we'll probably in our second podcast talk more about your post flying school ownership years. But I guess there's two questions that. So firstly, and it's obvious. I mean, I know you well. You've got a great reputation in the industry, and I think even if people, the first time the first time they're coming across you is in this podcast. The thing that shines through, Sohan, is your absolute love for teaching, your love of learning and teaching and connecting with people. And I think that's that's such an important gift. And then but I guess part of my question is that shines through. That's a statement, not a question. But the question is, do you think, in addition to your love of teaching, do you think the fact that you weren't a sort of straight A, found it all very easy, just flew through learning yourself to do the exams and all the various things. That it made you a better teacher.
Yes, yeah. And I don't think you have to have had that experience to be a good teacher, but it certainly gave me a lot of patience because I realized just you can't all learn the same way. I can't pick up a book and just learn. I'm very
Yeah.
fortunate I have twin girls, so when we did all the, bed building and cradle building and little bike building and all that sort of stuff, I kind of worked out the first bike, and then the second bike I just wanted to build it because I knew how to build it. I don't like using instruction books. I like people to show me things and talk to me, and I think that's why I really enjoyed the flying, because all the theory related to the practical, and then you could actually get into the aeroplane. Um, I was constantly, when I was in my classes, like going out to the airport and going, well, here's the flap, this is where the gear lever is. Whereas I knew other instructors that I don't think they even knew where the gate to the airport was, from the classroom. And that's fine. It's horses for courses. But I think I mean, from a flying point of view, I definitely went through sort of on minimum hours, and I really loved it, and I was good at it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's just not me. That's the examiner saying, you need to do your next upgrade as soon as possible because you've got the ability to do it. But I think I also knew, because I hadn't always passed, that when you do get it the first time, that is an achievement, and you've got to be grateful for that. But then when somebody just doesn't click, and somebody fails, like, I really knew what that felt like, and I knew that that's not a great feeling, and it can be very embarrassing, I guess, depending on who knows what's going on. And what I mean, I had one poor gentleman who failed his flight test for his PPL a couple of times, and really failed, really did silly things that you just couldn't kind of go, well, we'll just do a bit of revision and you'll be okay. And I didn't realize, but his wife was holding a surprise, you've got your license party.
Oh my lord.
And he'd found out, but
Oh,
hadn't
poor
said
man.
anything. So
Yeah.
not only was he under the pressure that, including I was invited, um, like all these people were going to his house that night, and his wife was spending the time that he was doing it prepping all the food. But then he would fail and have to ring and tell her that he'd failed, so that everybody had to pretend nothing had happened. Yes. So
I think we're all cringing inside thinking
I
of that.
I know, and
Yeah.
being invited to the party, knowing the party was happening, and failing him, and going, oh my gosh, how are we going to get hold of his wife and everybody else to say, please don't turn up and go congratulations, because he's actually really, anyway, it
Yeah.
was one of those.
Yeah.
And
Did
so
he
you
get
get
through in the end?
involved in people. He did brilliantly, and should have passed. And I think when all the other pressure came off, like anything in life, we can put ourselves under,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's lots of things going on in people's lives, but yeah, that was.
I usually ask what part of your role you enjoy the most, but I think that you've already described it's the teaching and connecting people. What was the least favourite part of your job of running a pilot training business, flying training
My,
business?
and I don't think it actually has changed. I think it's the politics of aviation, the politics of small businesses at an airport, and all of the things that everybody else does and says about you that is not true, but just gets done and said about you. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's always oh, well, they're only doing well because, or that's, they're about to go bust, or that
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
just all of that negativity, because it's people in small business vying for, we at Jandakot Airport, it's very different now, but there at the gate used to be a cattle grid, and it was literally a cattle grid in the road between the two fence posts. And we used to, always joke, who's going to get the next person with a wallet that comes over.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you were all, there was half a dozen flying schools, and one person would drive over the cattle grid, and it's
yeah,
where
yeah,
you were positioned, your reputation. Did you have the biggest yellow pages ad? I mean, that was a huge thing at the time. Who's going the biggest ad, and have we got in time? Because whoever's first, you get. It's like a featured thing on
yeah.
Google these
I
days.
was thinking about the yellow pages the other day, and again, we're going to sound like older people reminiscing
We
to
are.
some younger listeners here. But for those of you who don't know, the yellow pages was a big directory of business. This was pre-internet, or it was
Yeah, it was
certainly
pretty.
pre-internet and ran for quite a lot of time. And now you wouldn't use it. Everyone would use the internet to look up businesses or look up pilot training or flying training in me. But back in the day, the only way you found out people's phone numbers and business, you looked under the yellow pages, and there were you could either have a listing, or, as you say, the bigger and bigger the ad, obviously the more eyeballs it drew, and that was an incredible. The yellow pages made a lot of money for a very, very long time. So yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it was like a wallet comes over the cattle grid, and everyone's going, me, because you've got it's an expensive business to run, isn't it? You've
Yeah.
got planes, you've got
You've got
maintenance.
people, you've got instructors, and yeah, I think that's still the case. Like I'm very fortunate in what I do, that I can work in a lot of businesses, and I hear of the politics and the business side of it, and go, oh, that's fine. I'm just here to help you with your manuals, or I'm just here to do an audit, and it hasn't changed. But I imagine it's the same in any industry.
Yeah, yeah,
There's the politics and the business side of it. So
yeah. And just picking up a small thread that you've mentioned a couple of times. Um, and obviously, one of the things that Sky Careers is about is helping young people to get a greater understanding of aviation, and increased participation, but specifically women. And interested in your thoughts, and how big a factor was you being a female in those years, in terms of acceptance and getting on. Was that a small issue, or a significant?
day to day, to me, it wasn't significant, but then you kind of just get a slap in the face that reminded you.
Mm,
And like when my boss put me up to be a chief flying instructor and chief pilot, and you had to go and do your exams and do interviews and things like that. I mean, he got a phone call to say, look, put an ad in the Australian newspaper, which was where the ads went on a Friday, was the aviation special, for a 43-year-old male, and we'll consider it. So you kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, that's, and then, I mean, I've had passengers flatly refuse to get in an aircraft with me. Just, I'm not flying with a girl. I used to work part time as a waitress, and the chef was quite young, quite, I would have thought, very liberal in his thinking, all of those sorts of
mm,
things. And he just
mm.
said one night after work, when we were all just having a drink, he said, I'd get off a plane if there was a female pilot. I said, but it
Wow.
makes no difference. He goes, it makes all the world of difference. And he was only 2 or 3 years older than me at the time. So, he was early to mid 20s, and that was still his
Yeah.
thinking. So, and I think there was a lot of things, and it makes me cringe when I think of things that would get said in front of me and other women. Having two teenage daughters now, I would be mortified if they were treated and spoken to the way that I was, and witnessed other female pilots being spoken to, and just being just innuendos, and all of that sort of thing. It's not acceptable. And society has changed, definitely. I mean, I am talking 30 plus years ago, and even in society that is no longer acceptable. But it was kind of like the par. You'd all come back from flying, and people would just turn around and go, oh, white with one, thanks to Anne.
Yeah.
And you go,
Yeah.
why am I?
Yeah.
You know, what, why? But then, you know, and I'll tell a story because I think this really typifies how women can actually be our own worst enemies as well. And you know, at that period of time there was a lot of push, you know, we've got to have more women in the industry, and you know, women can do these things. And I think you can push that so far that then people push back. And I remember I was at the school and I'd come back from a flight. It was one of those 45-degree February Perth days. I was absolutely exhausted. And you pull the aircraft in and you pull it forwards because you're going to then get out and push it back into the flight line and tie it down and everything else. And I was sitting in the aircraft, I was recording all of the times and everything else. And friends of mine that were flying, they're still friends, like they're honorary uncles to my
Mm.
daughters, came past and said, do you want us to push you back? And I went, oh, I'd love you to, because all I want to do is get out of the heat and the sun and I'm exhausted. So they pushed the aircraft back for me, started tying it down. I got everything out. We covered up the aircraft and went inside. And there was a lady quite a bit older than me at the time doing her private license there. And she caught me in the car park and she said, I cannot believe you allowed that to happen. You have put back the fight of women years by letting those people push your aircraft back. You should have said no and done it yourself. I said, no way. It's tired.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have done the same for them. I
Yeah.
said they weren't doing it for me because they
Yeah.
didn't think I was capable of pushing
Yeah.
my own
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
aircraft back. They
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
doing it because they're a friend. And I said, I would have done, if they were sitting in the aircraft, I would have helped push back their aeroplane too. I didn't
Yeah.
see it as a boy-girl thing. I saw it as everybody's hot and tired and we all want to go home.
Yeah. Get it done quicker.
But
Yeah.
does that make sense?
No, I mean, and it's look, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that, I mean, you've touched on you've touched on a lot of things here, and it's clearly getting better. But also, we know from other conversations, and one of the main reasons that, you know, Sky Careers exists is because it's still an issue. It still is an issue. It's less of an issue than it was, and I know from having spoken to lots of people, both through our ambassador network and also on the podcast, it remains an issue. It's probably a lesser issue than it was, but an issue it is still. So we've still got work to do. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear your take on it. And just moving us forward, because I'm conscious of time. I knew we'd go long, but I don't want us to go too long, and we'll pick up on the broader themes and your leadership and your later career in our second podcast. But just give us a sense. So you, after 15 years, what happened? You left the flying school and then started something else. So talk
Yeah,
us
so
through
I
that.
had already started a separate business, the Civil Aviation Academy, which has been going from 2001. So decided that I I hadn't tired of flying. I had just tired of doing the same sort of flying all of the time, like flying in the same area. Yeah, circuits and to northern on flight tests and things like that. So wanted to do something very different. The other partners in the business, which is something that had happened over the time, wanted to take the business in a very, very different direction, and that just didn't appeal to me. I had the academy, and that's when I gave up the flying and went full on into working full time at the academy, doing the work of the academy, and I've been doing that for 25 years. So
Brilliant. And just in 30 seconds, what does the academy do?
uh approved training by CASA for dangerous goods, crew resource management. So online training that's compulsory through the regulatory body. I do a lot of manual work, so compliance, writing, so that rule head again,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
head for the rules, the only exam I could pass the first time. And yeah, we just contract work depending on what people need. And then of course, putting up the Sky Careers project, which has now become an entity unto itself, which is fabulous.
Has it ever? Has it ever? So it's interesting. So pulling it together. So, and what I love about that is it's another example, and we've heard this again and again and again in the podcast. It's how you can evolve your aviation. Your aviation career can take so many different
Absolutely.
forms. Yeah, and obviously you started off as a pilot, but you've in the process, because you're not just as a pilot, but also running a flying school, and so that takes you in so many different directions as a small business owner, and finance and maintenance and a whole lot of other things, which is much broader than just being a pilot. So, for example, my brother, who we've had on the pod, he was a military pilot and now he's an airline pilot. He knows about those things, but he's never had to interact. He doesn't pay for the fuel. He doesn't,
Yes. Yeah.
he doesn't get involved in the logistics of anything, or small business owners,
Mm.
or yeah, he's a pilot. So it's interesting for you that how you've evolved, and done different things, and how aviation's allowed you to do this, and there's multiple iterations, which is a common theme. So I'll ask you, closing off on I say this is the first part, and listeners, we're going to do a second podcast. We're going to be much broader and talk about leadership and aviation themes. We've touched on a few of them here, but just finishing for today, Sue-Ann, what advice would you give to other young women and men who might be considering a career in aviation, in any role?
Go for it. Look, I know a lot of people that have come into aviation, and then the skills and the expertise has led to other opportunities. So I think if you want to test the water, there are casual jobs, part-time jobs, all sorts of things. But don't consider that if you start as a ground handler or a baggage agent or cabin crew or even a pilot, that's where you're going to stay. I mean, I thought I'd get my license, become an airline pilot, and that would be me for life. And I now know if I'd done that, I would have been bored to death, because that's just not my personality as I got older. I think give it a go, and then keep your eyes wide, wide open, because there's going to be an opportunity out here or out here that's going to enable you to go in a completely different direction that you never would have anticipated. So just don't say no. Just think about it and see where an opportunity might take you. But give it a go. Just try it out.
Yeah, I'm like 30 years.
So I can't hear a word you're saying. All of that.
So,
Oh, sorry.
sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry, I moved away
Yes,
from
you are. Sorry.
from the microphone. I'm an amateur move. No, so the I was reading before I came on the podcast the idea that the 30-year career is dead.
Mm.
That no longer exists. So we are going to get multiple iterations. People are going to do multiple careers, and even if and that might be in aviation for a little bit and doing something else. So even if you go into aviation for 5 years and leave it, that's still an opportunity. But it's also the kind of, because there's so many things, so many aspects of aviation, and it's changing and evolving so quickly. You can imagine where it's like you've done from pilot to running a flying school to regulation, run your own business. That's 3 or 4 different steps, and we're going to see that increasingly. And I think aviation is just such a rich marketplace or industry area where so many of these things are possible, and so many new technologies and
Well,
ideas
there's new
are.
things coming that we can't even, unmanned aircraft is the future. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be the only future, but it is going to be part of it. And drones and different types of fuel, and they're relooking at hydrogen and all sorts of different things. So that the infrastructure and vertical takeoff aircraft, and flying Ubers and Amazon packages landing in your driveway. I mean, it's not just the people that are going to pilot those, but the designers and the operations people and the maintenance, and it's just going to be massive. And you and I have this conversation all the time, but AI is not going to get rid of the number of people that we need.
No, especially in aviation. All right, Sue-Ann, you've been magnificent. I thought our 20-minute conversation would be.
You with a few things that you didn't know about.
You did surprise me. You failed exams. I'm staggered. I'm staggered. But hey, listen, you've been a brilliant guest, Sue-Ann. Thanks so much for being part of the Sky Careers podcast, and we will get this one out there, and then we'll look at doing part 2. So thanks so much for your time.
No worries. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the Sky Careers podcast. If today's conversation has sparked your interest in aviation, then head over to our website at skycareers.com.au. Whether you dream of flying aircraft or you're curious about the hundreds of other exciting roles that keep the aviation industry moving, Sky Careers is your gateway to discovering these opportunities. And if you are already in the industry, check out Sky Careers Connect and Sky Careers Leadership and consider joining our online learning community. Until next time, keep reaching for the skies.